VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker, and we're here fresh off the bye week. The Vikings should have a quarterback announcement in the next 5 days or so. I don't know if they're going to rush and do it on Tuesday or Wednesday, or if they're going to make the Raiders and us all sweat it out. We shall see. But this show is not about only quarterbacks, Joshua Dobbs, Jaron Hall, or Nick Mullins. For the record, if you care, I predict Nick Mullins will get the nod. It sounds like the fan base wants Jaron Hall, understandably so, for that rookie upside, especially if you're not going to win a Super Bowl anyway. But we'll probably have we will have separate talkers about that this week. This weekend, for the Vikings, Week 13 went horribly wrong, and they didn't even play. The only thing that went right whatsoever for your Minnesota Vikings was Thursday Night Football in that fabulous fantasy football-laden game with the Cowboys and the Seahawks. The Vikings wanted the Seahawks to lose to kind of reduce the logjam at the end of the NFC's playoff picture, so, all the wild card berths. And they lost. And it felt like, all right, we're off to a good start this weekend. Seattle's one down. Now we need the rest to lose, or at least a handful of them. None of that shit happened. After the Seahawks lost the Cowboys, every wrong or bad thing per Vikings fandom happened. Down the line, the Rams beat Joe Flacco's Browns. That one sucked because the Rams are suddenly 6-6, the same record as, you guessed it, these Vikings. And then the Falcons, they are atop the NFC South. There's always a chance they return to orbit a little bit, and then the Saints catch them from behind. But now, in the off chance that the Falcons finish with one more win over the Vikings, of course, the Falcons will get in the postseason. The Vikings have the tiebreaker over the Falcons, for that helps, but it would have been a lot more rosy if the Jets had just beat the Falcons in New Jersey, East Rutherford. No cigar, that didn't happen. That's two adverse things that happened to Minnesota. And then the Buccaneers, who are still a sideways outside threat to the Vikings because of that damn Week 1 tiebreaker. They played the Panthers. I thought maybe this was a spot for the Panthers to get their second win of the season with Thielen and the gang and a new head coach and some of that fresh momentum from getting rid of Frank Reich. Nope. I think that one was 21-18. Buccaneers prevail. So now if they somehow get hot and the Vikings end up not finishing well in these remaining 5 games, don't forget the Buccaneers have the foremost single tiebreaker, and in fact, right now, the only team that has a tiebreaker advantage over the Vikings in the wild card playoff race. Then, between the Saints and the Lions, it was kind of like, well, do you want the Saints to take a wild card hit? Or do you want the division for the Vikings to still be within reach with the Lions? Probably you wanted to have that holy grail feeling that, well, we can still catch the Lions, so let's just cheer for the Saints, as gross as that sounds. Nope. The Lions started off by beating the shit out of the Saints, but the Saints caught up with them and only lost by 5. But now the Vikings are a full 3 games behind the Lions, so they'll need the Lions to drop 1 here soon. If the Vikings want to get within 2 games by Christmas Eve, that's what the Vikings will need to do if they want to control their own destiny to win the division. They need to get within 2 games of the Lions, and they are behind by 3 right now. And then the most gruesome or damning of them all for the Vikings playoff situation was last night, Sunday Night Football. The Packers beat the Chiefs. This was one on a ridiculously easy schedule remaining for the Packers. This was the one that you circled and said, well, surely they can't beat the Super Bowl champs. They're not that good, are they? Well, they're getting good. Like the moment the Packers lost to the Vikings, right after that, they got good. Offense, defense, and Jordan Love. So now, the Packers, I'll get to their schedule shortly. They did themselves a ginormous favor by beating the Chiefs and, in fact, have a better playoff probability now than the Vikings. Can't make it up. So what does this mean? How was this weekend so terrible for the Vikings? Well, according to the New York Times playoff simulator, I invite you to go play around with that thing. Entering Sunday, so at 11 a.m. Central Time, the Vikings had a 51% probability of reaching the postseason. And again, they weren't playing at all. They couldn't screw it up. Well, the world screwed it up for them when we went to bed last night after the Packers win. The Vikings fell to 41% without even playing a game. All of those rotten things on Sunday. The Rams win, Falcons, Buccaneers, Lions win, Packers beat the Chiefs. They dropped 10% in a single day by no fault of their own. So when I say this weekend went horribly for the Vikings, it was like a script that said, how can we reduce the Vikings' chance of getting to the postseason? Well, let's have these 5 teams win. So, I mean, the Vikings still control their own path. All they have to do is win games. But it could have been a lot easier if the Packers, like the anxiety, we could have taken it down a notch, saying, oh, look, the Browns beat the Rams or the Packers lost the Chiefs. Now, if they drop an extra game to the blah, blah, blahs, like the Bengals or something like that, it's not doomsday. Well, every win's going to count now for the Vikings, who are 6-6, like a litany of other NFC teams. Per ESPN's Football Power Index, that one's a little bit more favorable to your Vikings. That is at 51% right now. Going into Sunday, per ESPN, it was at 59%. Because of all the shenanigans from other teams, it fell by 8. But the Packers now are at a 67% playoff FPI, a probability of getting to the playoff after party, than the Vikings, who are at 51%. So the Packers really, in the last 5 games, they've won 4 of them, have put themselves in the driver's seat. And now listen to this Packers schedule, if you will. The Giants, the Buccaneers, the Panthers, the Vikings, and then the Bears. In those 5 games, all the Packers have to do is go 3-2, and they are a virtual lock to reach the postseason. Well, what about the Vikings with that little scenario? They have 5 games left too. Now, after this rotten Sunday, the Vikings basically have to go 3-2 or better. That is the cutoff. There was grace and leeway before Sunday that if they went 2-3, they won the 2 AFC games and they lost the remainder or something like that. If the Vikings before Sunday went 2-3, then we would find ourselves scoreboard watching in week 17 or week 18, hoping all right, maybe 8-9 gets you in the dance. Maybe you score an upset over the Eagles or Lions or something like that. But that's gone. That's dead. There would have to be a really, really weird patch of losing from those other NFC teams for the Vikings to be 2-3 and get in the dance. So after yesterday's regrettable 5 wins by all those anti-Viking teams, 3-2 is now the firm cutoff. 3-2 will almost assuredly get the Vikings in. Anything less than 3-2, not going to happen. The math says no. Here's what happened. The loss at Denver, in retrospect, certainly didn't help the Vikings, but I will insist to this day that one, because it was against an AFC team, really wasn't doomsdayist. The loss to the Bears, that one was so damning. It screwed up the conference tiebreaker for the Vikings. It should have been an easy win because the Bears, let's face it, sucked. And then you were at home. That was the game that if the Vikings end up going 8-9 or somehow 9-8 and don't get in, which would be weird, if the Vikings miss the game by the playoffs by a single game, it's going to be because that Bears game was the one that they should have won. I mean, the sideline pass to Jordan Addison that wasn't a good pass, and then Addison just forgot where in the hell he was. Even after Hawkins scored the touchdown, it felt like they were going to win, or when Fields fumbled, they just coughed that one away, and that one will be, at least for 2023's sake, an eternal gaffe as to what not to do when you're in a postseason chase. So, I was a lot more optimistic, and I think everybody was, about the Vikings' postseason chances, but it really dampened after the loss to the Bears. It's basically a coin flip right now, especially if you trust ESPN's FBI. Now, rounding out the show, the Vikings are a 2.5-point favorite at the Raiders, and we don't even know who the Vikings quarterback will be, whether it's Josh Dobbs, Jaron Hall, or Nick Mullins. Vegas evidently doesn't care. They're like, well, whoever you pick, you're probably going to win by about a field goal. And this, one of the easier games. I personally don't think the Raiders suck. Whenever I think of them, I just think of Max Crosby, and then you got the new, Antonio Pierce coach. They seem like they're hungry to play. Of course, Devontae Adams on that team. That won't be fun. I ultimately will end up picking the Vikings to win because I think they're more desperate and in the playoff hunt. And we've already seen this Viking team look like shit. 1-4. You lose your best player, Justin Jefferson. Let's do a fire sale. Let's hopefully get Caleb Williams, Drake May. And they went off and win 5 games. And you're like, whoa. I don't know if they're going to win 5 in a row, but I would guess that Kevin O'Connell, I trust him enough for this team to have the gumption to finish 3-2 at least, maybe 4-1 down the stretch. But the verdict here is Sunday specifically could not have gone worse for the Vikings' playoff hopes. I guess thank goodness the Seattle Seahawks lost on Thursday. Otherwise, we would have had a total gauntlet of bad happenings. But I'll leave you with that takeaway. 5 games left. If the Vikings go 3-2, they're going to get in the dance, hopefully get frisky. Anything less than 3-2 ain't going to do it. We'll be back soon, talk more Viking stuff. Skol, baby.